From the college by the lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
We're so pleased to bring you a program today dealing with the style of surrealism in art. One of our favorite programs to do is in the field of art. And today's program is going to emphasize paintings through depicting the elements of the Pacific Northwest. Returning to our program from back in 1991 is my very good friend and a really favorite artist of mine, Gary Hall. He was with us for 2 programs in 1991, and I am always so excited about what he does, and I think you'll find today's program equally interesting. Gary, welcome to the program. I can't believe it's been 5 years since you were here, and we're delighted to have you back, and thank you for bringing some of your works with you. And in a few moments, I'm going to have you to take our viewers through some paintings that we videotaped earlier in today and talk about your style and how it's evolved since 1991. But I'm very pleased to have with me my 2 panel members to join in the question today. First of all is Janelle Berg, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And my traditional method, Gary, is to have them to start the questions, but before they do, at this time I'm going to invite you to take us through your some works, and I know the order that we have those in is the oldest work up to the new, and you and I can engage in a little bit of conversation as we go through that. So I'll ask our staff now if they would put up the first painting that you brought and give you an opportunity to explain this particular work.
This piece, this is the oldest piece of the ones you'll see here. They're all acrylic. This piece in particular doesn't necessarily have a title. In fact, I'll probably talk a little more about that. But as you'll notice as we go through the other pieces, this piece in particular, I think is a little flat looking compared to what you'll see and where I think I've progressed with the pieces.
So with the next piece, you'll start seeing this change in style.
Yeah, I think you see a little more richness in the colors.
As we do that, you and I talked the other day about some of the things you're doing, and I see in those paintings some more detail as we move to this next painting.
This other piece here, you can see it first off in the sky. There's a little more brilliance in the sky. I'm kind of leaning towards, I'm trying to get more brushstroke in my work instead of just pure airbrush. And so this piece here, you can't really, if you were to see this work in person, you get a little better of an idea, but you can see just a little more richness, like I say, in the color.
Am I correct to say some more depth?
Right.
We'll have him to bring up the next painting now.
This one, the water was almost purely done with brushstroke. And I just found that I'm trying to get to where I'm not having to stencil everything in order to get those clean lines with an airbrush. If I can do the work and do it just freehand with a brush, it saves me time, but I can also, I think the technique comes out a little better.
Another thing about the water there, too, you brought this to my attention in some of your earlier works. The water would be very smooth, and now you're putting more...
You get with the airbrush, you still get the really nice gradations, and that's the main reason I use an airbrush. But I think with a brush stroke, your versatility is so much more. You can do so much more with it. I'm getting into doing many overlays, washes of color, pure color over pure color, and that's really where you get the depth. When you paint something that's say an opaque color, when it's just a solid color, when the eye sees it, light is really bouncing off the surface color, and what you see is what you get. When you do overlay over overlay with pure color and almost put it on in a way that's translucent, you're able to actually see the color in a much deeper tone. What's happening is you've got one layer over another, and the light is passing through all layers of the color and bouncing off the white surface of the bottom, so when it comes back to the eye sees all the colors mixed together and with a little more depth, whereas when something's opaque and it's just one solid color, like the blackness on this table, you're just seeing surface color. So this is my goal, and you start to see it more, especially with this piece. There's color, what I'm bringing in, where the clouds are kind of filtering in from the top. I'm able to just gloss over, just really subtly, really light colors, but nothing opaque, just so you can still see the underlying colors. So when you get the mix of everything together, you get a much greatness in the richness of the color.
And then you get that dimension.
Exactly, right. The dimension is so much more.
A lot of depth to it.
Right, absolutely.
The other thing about your work that I find really interesting, this illustrates this, and what our staff's done, they've shown the same painting in different parts of it in different angles, but is how spacious it is. And the upper part of this, the clouds and so forth, I have a real appreciation of how you are. It's very open, and there's some paintings that you have and a mural that you did I wish we could show that we don't have, but that is very, very impressive. This one's not quite finished, but thank you for bringing it.
Yeah, I was in the middle of this piece, and you and I discussed this piece in particular because I was working on this one at the time, and I thought that it's the newest piece as far as what I'm using so much more brush stroke in this one. The others, I was just little by little using a little more, adding it. In this one, it's, I'd say, maybe only a fraction of it in the background of the sky is airbrush, and the rest of it is with brush stroke. And I think color-wise, that piece there depicts that the most.
I've had the opportunity to watch your work from the beginning, and I'm very appreciative of it from the early till now, but I can see a lot of different techniques applying. And so I think in the long run with your artwork, you're going to have a lot of variety to look at. And so, Gary, thank you for bringing those, and I'll ask the panel if they'll continue the questioning.
Well, those are wonderful, beautiful pieces, and we appreciate your work very much. Can you tell us something about what is surrealism? What are the different styles? What would you call your style? And then would you define surrealism somewhat for us?
I would say, of course, this is my definition. It's something that's, surrealism is something that's beyond realism. And, you know, of course, it's always, especially in the arts, it's so relative, yes. You know. But with that kind of understanding, it's, for example, in my work, you know, it's got that look of realism. You know what you're looking at, and yet it's not. It's almost, the colors aren't true to life. The blues are much more intense than what you would normally see. So it's kind of almost along the lines of maybe stylized realism. You're going beyond what is real, even though what you're looking at, you know what you're looking at, and the mountains and trees and what, you know, whatever else.
But there's some imagination with it.
Right, but it's done deliberately. You know, you're doing it in a way that it's not like someone is maybe portraying something in a color that's what they really think it looks like. They're doing it because in their imagination that's what they want to bring out, and I think it goes beyond what realism would be, for example, in photography.
Now, you talked a little bit about using the airbrush and using the brush stroke. Can you explain for our viewers what you mean by the airbrush?
With an airbrush, what you're doing is through a gun, you're forcing the mixture of air and paint
onto the canvas.
Onto the canvas or whatever you're working on. And the effect you get is almost a fogged-on effect. You're able to create really gradual gradations of color, and there's nothing. The air is just blowing it right onto the surface. So you're almost getting a cotton effect, and you can you know, myself, I find the best use is in gradations, and that's why I always prefer to do the skies. I can start with such a light color and just, you know, bring that all the way up to such a dark color in such a fine gradation that it looks even. It looks as one. There's no separation, and not that, I mean, there's artists that are so good at a brush stroke that they can bleed color in, and from a distance you would swear it was airbrushed. But so it's my preference to use it in that way. But I'm finding that now, as far as using a brush, I'm finding that I can. It's so painstaking to put an overlay of it's like a real thin plastic material that you would cut with a knife, and what you pull is what you're going to spray, and so a stencil effect. So I just found that doing that purely was taking me so much longer. And again, I thought it was starting to make my work look a little too flat. So now, in using a brush, I can kind of liven things up a little bit. I can do kind of a glossy over a glossy, glazing effects. And I just, for myself and where I want to go, I just think it benefits me so much more.
Gary, tell us, if you would, a little bit about your background. Did you study art formally, or are you largely self-taught?
Both. I've always been interested in art since from grammar school on up. I always excelled, mostly in the arts. And then once I made the decision to at least try and follow a career in the arts, I came here to NIC, got some great instruction. Joe Jonas, who's still here at the college, was a wonderful instructor. And I stuck with this. I was here for 4 years, learned a great deal. But then when I left, it seemed like what was important mostly for me was that it kind of funneled me in a direction as to what do I want to do in the arts. And here you get it. It's a great opportunity to be able to kind of have an experience with a broad variety of arts. And you don't really know until you really start focusing in one area. If you don't try it all, you really don't know where you might excel or where you find the most gratification in. And that's where I first picked up the airbrush, was here at the college. And we just happened to be doing, it was a project, and the instructor was introducing it to us, and I just fell in love with it. And from then on, when I left here, then I kind of carried it on. I started learning on my own. It's kind of, it's a slow, gradual progress, and I don't think it ever ends. I mean, I'm still, as we've been talking with these other pieces, I'm still growing, and I'm still never really happy with what I do. I am at first, but then the more you look at it, the more you think, this can grow a little bit more. So both here at NIC and on my own.
What would you say at this stage in your art career is driving your selection of subject matter, the choice of acrylics, the types of paints that you're doing? Is it commercially acceptable? Is it what you really want to do, or are you still, as you say, just experimenting with a variety of things?
Well, it's interesting that you say acceptable, because it's been airbrushing, I think, in the fine arts is just coming into its own. I think for a long time it was definitely not accepted to a certain degree, that it just wasn't considered among something that would be considered fine arts. It was so commercial, because in the commercial industry it is used widely because of the nice gradations you can get with the brush. But I chose acrylic early on because acrylic is fast drying, and when it dries waterproof. So when you're doing an airbrush, especially the way I do it, you're doing many overlays. So I would shoot one particular color, and I didn't want to wait 2 days before I could come back to it, put another overlay, and it would take me forever to do a piece. So with acrylic, you have a situation where you can spray it, it becomes waterproof, and within minutes it's dry and it's ready. So speed was a big factor in choosing acrylics. And the other one is I found that acrylic, especially over time, really retains its brilliancy. Some colors, depending on, obviously if it's in the outside, it's going to fade quite a bit with the sun. But I just found that it was the strongest of all the colors. With oil or even watercolor, a lot of times you'll have to put a protective coat. With acrylic, it's such a durable paint that most artists, they won't put a protective coat because it's so strong you really don't need it. So was so versatile, and it worked so well for me. And even I'm still sticking with it because I'm finding that the new techniques that I want to use with it, I'm able to use it like a watercolor, or give similar effects that you might see in oil. So I just felt oil. It was because of the fumes, and it wasn't in the drying times. Those other routes didn't work for me.
If I could ask one more quick question while we're on this topic, do most artists who choose acrylic as their medium, do they use airbrush, do they use brush, or do they use a combination as you do?
I would say most use acrylic, but I've known
use acrylic or use
acrylic.
I'm sorry. Let me restate my question then. If they choose acrylic, do most of them use airbrush? Most of them use a regular paintbrush, or most of them combine the two techniques like you do?
Well, acrylic, I think, when it was first developed, was being used mostly with brush. But I think they found if you study some of the colors, Liquitex, Winsor & Newton, a lot of them are now creating a line that is just strictly for airbrush, because the pigment sometimes can be so heavy when you're spraying it can clog up the gun and cause some problems. So they're creating these lines of acrylic that are very fluid and work very well with an airbrush. So it's kind of I think it's grown, but I think originally it was mostly used with brush.
Gary, you also have done some mural work, and that's much larger and I would assume more time-consuming. And also you've worked with a well-known gentleman in this country in the Seattle area. And I'm going to have our staff put up a video of one of the works in Seattle. And I think it's Many Stories building. Would you tell us a little bit how this works and how it's different from your other paintings? Sure. Although this particular one someone else did that we're going to show.
Right. The artwork, this piece was done, it was a West Coast tour, and the one that I was able to be involved in as a volunteer was to work on that staff and watch Weiland do his piece. His piece is, they're all whales, and the interesting thing about Weiland is that he's, not only is he doing what he loves to do, and he's making a great living at it, but he's also doing it for a cause, and that he's trying to help preserve the sea life. And so what he does, he travels along the coastlines, and on this particular one was the West Coastline in 1994 in August. And I had an opportunity to go there and watch him work, and it was just, you almost had to be there to appreciate it. It's the scale. This building here I believe it's a 12-story building.
And he does this in one day.
And he did this in a day. And now we're seeing one side of the building. He did both sides of that building. Another one was another scene. And it's just to watch him do this, and it was so inspiring for me to go there and watch someone doing, not only in the same field that I'm in, but doing it at a level that most artists would love to be, and to watch him run around on cloud 9 every day of that week. It was just so inspiring.
So it gives you ideas too. Gary, I've had the opportunity to talk with you about your work a lot, and I really enjoy doing that. And I know that you will be willing to share with the viewers that as you developed your style, and you had some really in-depth ideas that you're doing, and to then read and study other artists and discover that others are doing some of the same things. And I've got a really involved question if you'd share some of that discovery that you had. But I want you to tie that to the idea that I was intrigued the other day when I talked to you about that some of your pieces you title and some of them you don't title.
Oh, yeah.
And why that happens.
Yeah, that was a great conversation we had. To kind of set it up, I've always had a hard time titling artwork. It just seemed to me, unless, of course, there's a subject matter that you're specifically, say for example, a political piece. You're already starting with an idea, and the idea grows into a piece of artwork. Now, on the other hand, if using your imagination, you're getting these ideas in your head. There's times when I'll have a whole piece I'll put together in my head just through imagination. Well, am I supposed to make up a title for something like that really didn't start with a title? Or and how do I go about that, or do I just let the person who's viewing the work come up with their own ideas? If the title, will the title maybe inhibit someone or narrow their ideas of what they think maybe it means? So, where this started was I was doing a lot of studying on Maxfield Parrish, and who I really admire his work. And in studying him, he was talking about a similar subject matter and how he detested putting titles. And he did a lot of commercial work, so a lot of pieces he did were calendar work, things that were in the advertising arena. And so they a lot of times would title it themselves. And I'm sure that was fine, but he stated in there that he had a hard time. And it made me feel better because I thought, well, maybe I'm missing something here. I just have a hard time giving a title to a piece of artwork. And Parrish had made the statement that the reason he disliked titles was that it didn't allow the viewer their own ideas and perspectives as to what it meant to them. And that if he was to give it a title, maybe someone might look at that, oh, well, that's what that means. I kind of thought maybe it better, showed this or that. And I felt a lot better after reading that. I thought, I don't feel so bad about maybe not titling a piece.
So there's different reasons for different paintings, or they come to you in different ways.
Yeah, and that's not to say that I won't give a piece a title, but I have a hard time giving a title to a piece when originally that piece just came to me just through imagination, and it really doesn't depict a place or a specific idea. It's just maybe the beauty of the piece, and to appreciate just that. And it doesn't have to have a title necessarily.
Janelle Bird.
I want to follow along with that and simply make a comment that it's somewhat like music. There are a good number of compositions that are written that are never titled with anything other than a number.
Yeah.
And that some people might visualize something that's going on in the music, but for most people, they simply hear the beauty of the music and see the beauty of the music,
Right.
and you're looking at the beauty of the artwork, and you're seeing that, the beauty of the composition of the artwork. I would take it the scale, the color, all of those kinds of things, without necessarily putting a name to it.
And that's interesting too, because there's one piece titled Adagio for Strings, and when I hear that piece, a lot of times you reflect, maybe depending on the mood you're in, you'll reflect maybe your own feelings with that piece of music, and later maybe you'll study up on that piece and learn that why it was done, and you'll think, well, that's interesting because I would have never put that together with that piece. So yeah, I mean that's a really good similarity, and it does reflect how I feel in comparison with the artwork.
Now I want to talk a little bit about scale. It seems to me that one of the things that artists are able to do so much better than the rest of us is understand the scale, make things look real because of the scale in the painting. So can you give me some idea, how do you go about getting that kind of scale? Do you have in mind when you start the painting everything that's going to be in it? Do you have a visual image, or do you add a tree, or you add a bush or a rock or whatever? How does that work?
I would say it's kind of a combination of all those things. Sometimes something might just catch my mind, and it'll be something that will inspire me, and it'll be just a little piece. And as the imagination and the wheels start to turn, the piece just starts coming together. I'll just start getting these ideas coming into my head, and before I know it, in my head, I have a completed piece, completely done. And then other times, I'll have to do a whole series, and I think this is the majority of artists prefer to do a series of sketches. And then from those thumbnail sketches, you might find 3 out of maybe 15 that you really like. And then, as it goes, your imagination starts saying, well, let's start adding this, or let's throw something else in. So it really develops along the way. But as far as technique goes, usually a sketch, small-scale sketch, and then I'll put together a few that I like, then create a large sketch, maybe almost exactly 2 size of what I want the piece to be. And then using skills of understanding perspective and all those different things. Some like to use a graph. Myself, I don't like to use a graph because I never take one image and just blow it up. Usually I kind of create on the full-size scale as I go along. So it develops with the sketches, and then once I finish the sketch, or the full-size sketch, I will slowly just start working from top to bottom and just kind of start gradating colors in and creating shapes until it's finished.
Janelle, I just have to interject here before we go to Steve that Gary and I were coming from Spokane Airport some 2 or 3 years ago, and it was a really severe lightning storm, and he was so taken by that storm in his comments. I thought, now he'll do something from this, and he did within the next week or so. So you're saying that
I did a number of pieces with that.
That lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And so those things happen too. Steve Sheen?
Gary, I was going to talk to you a little bit about themes, and I'll ask the audience to remember the examples of your work that they've seen, not the Weiland piece, the killer whale, but most, except for the one that was the very abstract piece, most had an outdoor scene with some architectural elements in it, some pillars and columns and things like that. What's happening there? Is that representative of a lot of your work?
A lot of my work, and a lot of people have asked me, were you an old Greek or something? And it's just a passion of mine. I just love architecture that came from Grecian times, a lot of Egyptian. I'm just really drawn to that. And so what I've tried to do is always incorporate some element of that type of architecture into my work. And not always, but it seems to be the majority of my work. And that newest piece that I'm not finished with yet, that's going to have some.
I was going to ask that question next.
Yeah,
so that will have an architectural element in it before you're done.
Definitely. And I think just because of my own preference, I think the piece, even though the overall piece might be very appealing, I think there should always be something within the piece that has a focal point, has something in it that really draws your attention, and then as you come from that, you just kind of see everything else that kind of works in with it. But the focal point seems to always be that type of architecture.
On that note, I bring the program to conclusion. On behalf of our panel and our staff, Gary Hall, we thank you so much for being here. It was extremely interesting and inspiring. And ladies and gentlemen, as I've indicated, our guest has been Gary Hall, doing paintings through depicting the elements of the Pacific Northwest, the style of surrealism. I would invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.